What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I got another really awesome video for you guys. As you can see right here, I just got the new Moz 7 by Gep RC in the mail. This is a Bind and Fly 7-inch drone. So I'm really excited about this drone because I feel like I'm missing a kind of long range drone in my fleet. Obviously, you guys know me on the channel. I have two Mavic 3s. I have a 3.5-inch Cinewhoop. I have a 2.5-inch Cinewhoop, and I feel like I'm really missing like a nice, strong, long-range drone that has really good battery life and can really do well in the wind. Because as you guys know, here in the Bay Area, the weather is getting really unpredictable. It's getting super windy, and a lot of the times, one of my favorite places to fly actually is in really vast nature areas. I really love flying at the beach. I love doing mountain surfing. I love flying in forests. And my 3.5-inch Cinewhoop just wasn't really cutting it because in the wind, it doesn't do that well. It gets kind of tossed around in the wind. And also, when you put the GoPro on top, I only get about like 3 minutes of battery life. And honestly, that's not really that fun when I'm trying to kind of explore a nice beach area or a nice, hillside or mountain area. 3 to 4 minutes is just not cutting it. So that's why I really wanted to order something like this, because when I have a 7-inch drone like this, it's gonna fly really similarly to my Mavic, because the Mavics are basically 7-inch drones. Obviously it's a cinema camera drone, so it doesn't fly like an FPV drone, but it does do really well in the wind because of those nice strong motors and those big propellers. So the purpose of this video is to show you guys that setting up an FPV drone is not that hard. I know a lot of you guys want to dive into FPV, but you might be a little bit scared because you're kind of intimidated by hooking it up to the controller, hooking it up to Betaflight on your computer, connecting it to your goggles, because obviously it's not a DJI drone. And obviously that's why DJI drones are so popular and so easy, because you literally just break them out of the box, connect it to your phone on an app, and you're basically ready to go. With FPV drones, you just need a few more steps, but I'm gonna show you guys everything you need to know. This is gonna be your one-stop shop on how to set up your FPV drone. This doesn't just apply to this drone in particular. This technique is gonna apply to any Bind and Fly you really get online. Let's open this bad boy up. Okay, sick. Woo! Wow. This thing is big. A lot of people think that to get into FPV, you have to be really good at soldering. You have to be really good at tuning your quad on Betaflight. And although those things are very helpful, obviously, you don't need to know much about those. Like, I'm mostly just a pilot. I'm a cinematic pilot. I use these drones and I love to go out and go flying and get awesome shots. I do know how to solder a little bit. So for example, with my motors, if a motor wire breaks off or any of these wires get disconnected, I do have the knowledge and skills to repair it a little bit. It's pretty easy. All you need to know how to do is just how to use a soldering iron proficiently and just put the wires back. And there's a lot of wiring diagrams online. There's a lot of tutorials to follow. So I feel like I'm pretty okay at fixing my quad. By no means, I'm not a builder. I could not probably build this thing from scratch, honestly. I would definitely need some help, but that's what I'm saying. You don't need to know how to build to fly these things. Before I got this thing, I did a bunch of research. I looked up all the parts on everything this thing comes with, from the motors to the frame, to the O3 Air unit, to the flight controller, to the TBS Crossfire. And honestly, it came out to be pretty much the same price as just buying the Bind and Fly. So I just realized, since I don't have the most free time in the world right now, it was definitely much easier and much more efficient to just go ahead and buy the Bind and Fly. And I'm pretty happy with that, because now I have a ready to go 7-inch drone to already get some awesome shots. And I don't have to spend a bunch of time trying to build this thing, trying to troubleshoot, because building definitely takes a long time and it's not easy at all to get everything working, because these things are kind of intricate, honestly. So yeah, that's just a bit about that. But so the first step we're going to do here before we connect our drone to Betaflight on the computer is we want to connect our TBS Crossfire receiver on the drone to the TBS Crossfire transmitter on our remote controller. This is going to be the first and most important step, because this is how we communicate to our drone via the remote controller, and it's also how we're going to set it up in Betaflight. So it's really important that we do this step before we connect it to Betaflight on the computer. So actually, I just did this off camera because I ran into a few problems, but don't be afraid guys, I was able to do it successfully. And something to keep in mind is on a lot of other drones actually, when you first plug in the USB-C to your flight controller, it actually provides power to both the flight controller and your TBS Crossfire receiver. That's the way it works, at least on a few of my other drones like the Gep RC Cinelog 35. However, I found that on my drone, I plugged in my flight controller to Betaflight, and I was expecting to see some lights on my TBS Crossfire receiver, and I wasn't seeing any flashing lights there. So my next order of business was to actually disconnect it and actually power my drone up via the LiPo battery. And thank God that worked, because once I plugged it in, I saw some nice flashing lights on my TBS Crossfire receiver, and I thought I was all ready to go and bind it. I then put my controller into binding mode by turning it on, going to the Crossfire configure menu, pressing micro TX and pressing bind, and I was going to hold down the bind button on my TBS Crossfire receiver. However, I got nothing. I even held it down for 10 seconds and absolutely nothing. And honestly, I was getting kind of frustrated at that point, but I found that all you have to do is actually update your TBS Crossfire transmitter here. TBS Agent Desktop, just click on XF Micro TX, which is this guy right here. And I went over here to the firmware tab and I updated it to version 6.19. Before it was on a much older one over here, and that was actually the main cause of my problem. So make sure you guys keep this in mind, because this is exactly why a lot of people are kind of scared to do FPV, because there are a lot of kind of small intricacies you have to do in order to get up in the air. It's not going to be like a regular DJI Mavic, you know, so you have to kind of know your stuff and just look up tutorials, but it's super easy. All you have to do is just update this guy to the latest firmware. That only took about a few minutes. Then I just put it back in my remote. I powered this guy on.
Welcome to OpenTX. Switch warning.
I then went into my system preferences here. I did Crossfire configure. And then I plugged in my drone with the LiPo battery here. I pressed XF Micro TX. And I just pressed bind, and then I just used a tiny little screwdriver here and clicked that little bind button, and everything was all bound up, which is awesome. So yeah, that was a little bit frustrating at first, but yeah, just kind of be smart about it, look up some tutorials. And the problem was because this thing wasn't updated, and honestly, I kind of forgot about that because I had to do this in the past on my other Bind and Fly drones in order to get this thing up in the air. So yeah, that's a huge step. So make sure that your controller is all bound up to your receiver, because then next we can hook it up to Betaflight finally. So go ahead and plug it in via USB-C, your flight controller here. And next you want to go to our receiver tab here. And this is where we check to make sure everything's working. As you can see here, my throttle's good. My pitch is good. My yaw is good. Everything is where it needs to be. And that's awesome. And in case this isn't working correctly, what you want to do is go to channel map, and that's how you fix that. You can change around the letters AETR 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's how you correct it. But out of the box, this thing should be correctly set up, because that's the whole point of getting a Bind and Fly. Everything's all ready to go basically. So yeah, this is awesome. That means our controller is all set up correctly. Everything is good here. You can even look at the little drone icon down here to make sure everything's set up correctly. That is amazing. And the next very important step is you want to go to the modes tab, because this is where we're going to map out our different switches here. So actually I'm going to go ahead and delete these because I want to keep mine consistent with all of my other drones. I don't want to have to change my muscle memory when I'm flying different drones. So I want to first go to pre-arm here. Go to pre-arm, press add range here. Oh, actually, one thing to keep in mind is when you try to reset these, you have to press save so it can get transferred over to the flight controller, so the flight controller can remember that. So See, now the beeper doesn't go like that anymore. So, okay. So first you want to go to your first thing you want to map, which is pre-arm. You press add range here, then you flick your little switch here. So I want pre-arm to be activated when I go down here. So then you move the little slider over here, press save. Okay, awesome. Next, I want to go to arm. You press add range here, go like that. Go over there, press save. Awesome. And next I want to go to beeper here, which is right here. Add range, press save. Boom, everything's working. And lastly, I don't really use it that much, but I guess we'll set angle mode over here just for fun. By default, it's going to be in acro mode, so we can go into angle mode by going like that, which is awesome. Awesome, and just like that, we have all of our modes set up. It's really easy to set up, it doesn't take that much time, obviously. All right guys, awesome. So we just set up our remote controller. We made sure that our little gimbals here are working properly. It's controlling the drone correctly. Next, we mapped out our switches here. We had the pre-arm, arm, beeper, and angle mode. That's awesome. Next, we can go ahead and set our remote controller aside. And next, what's really important is we want to make sure that our motors are all good to go and making sure that they're going to go in the right direction. So this is where actually the documentation in the box is pretty helpful because, all right guys, so once we got our remote control all set up and ready to go, it's really important that we jump into the motors tab to ensure that all of our motors are going the correct direction that they need to go. And it's really helpful to check out the diagram on the manual here because here it shows us that the motors are supposed to be turning inside. So we're going to go ahead and check the motors one by one just to make sure they're all going the right direction and they all work properly. So I'm going to go ahead over here to motor 1. Oops. All right guys, so we just checked to make sure that all of our motors are turning in the correct direction and they're all functioning properly. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and select this enable expert mode because here next we want to configure what happens when we get a failsafe. Obviously, since this is a 7-inch long-range drone, it comes with a GPS and therefore the Betaflight configuration is accustomed to this setup. However, as a beginner, someone like you actually don't really want to mess with these GPS settings in the beginning. And actually personally, I've had some weird experiences using these fail-safe GPS rescue return to home. One time my drone literally kind of darted all the way up into the ceiling of this kind of solar panel structure and it legit freaked out and it went like crazy up at the roof. It was like stuck here at the ceiling and it went full throttle and it was super scary, honestly. So I would definitely recommend setting your failsafe to just drop, especially when you're starting off. It's definitely more of an advanced feature and that's why it's hidden under the expert mode tab on Betaflight. So what you want to do is actually go over here to the failsafe tab and I'm going to select my stage 2 failsafe to just drop. So that means if I'm flying around somewhere and I lose connection, it's just going to kind of drop down, and that's actually what I want because I don't want it to do anything crazy right now. I think the failsafe tab is a really important tab to understand because right now it doesn't make too much of a big deal, but later when you want to get into the GPS rescue mode tabs and you want it to return home when you lose connection, this is all going to be dealing with the return to home feature. So failsafe tab is really important. All right guys, next on to our final and last step, which is going to be activating and setting up our O3 Air unit. So once you plugged in your O3 Air unit via USB-C to your computer, you want to open up DJI Assistant 2 for Consumer Drone Series. And once you connect it, you should see it automatically show up on the computer here. Go ahead and double click that and go ahead and update the Air unit here. All right guys, so once we updated our O3 Air unit via DJI Assistant 2 on the computer, you want to go ahead and plug your drone in, power on your goggles 2 or V2 goggles, whichever one you own. And next you want to get a tiny little thing and press the bind button on the O3 Air unit. And then hold down the bound button on your goggles 2 here. And boom, that's it. We should get a picture now. Awesome, we got a picture. Let's do it. And right now I can see there's a bunch of stuff on my OSD that is really easy to go ahead and fix on Betaflight. All we have to do is just reconnect it to Betaflight. In fact, we can do that right now actually, because since we decided to turn off our GPS features for now, I think it's going to be better for our OSD to just go ahead and turn all that stuff off so it doesn't distract us. And in order to do that, just plug it back into Betaflight here. Go to the OSD tab. And go ahead and just turn off GPS latitude, longitude, satellites, speed, home direction. Turn off all that good stuff and go ahead and press save. And just like that, we're all good to go. Everything's all set up. We got our goggles set up, remote controller set up, all our motors are ready to go. Next, all we have to do is just go ahead and test out on the field and see how this thing flies. So let's get it. All right, what's up guys? So we got everything all set up on the workbench. We got our Betaflight settings all dialed in, our controllers all ready to go. My LiPos are all charged up. I put in my propellers correctly. I put on the battery straps, and I also installed my little GoPro mount so we can get some cool footage out of today's first flight. And yeah, basically you're all ready to go. Next thing you want to do is find a nice cool place to do your first maiden flight. And I would highly recommend choosing like a park, somewhere that's really wide open, somewhere where you could actually recover the drone in case you crash, because the whole point of a maiden flight is to just make sure that everything's all good to go. Your antennas are good, your connection's good, your battery's good, your propellers are working properly, your motors are good, because that's really important. You never want your first maiden flight on your drone to be over water or over a forest, because if anything is wrong with it, like you lose connection or something's not correct with the battery or something like that, this thing is just gonna end up in a tree and it's gonna be really kind of a really bad day for you, honestly. Trust me, it's happened to me before. All right guys, so we're gonna set up my drone right now. I have everything I need for this flight all in this tiny bag right here. So first we're gonna get our controller all ready to go. This is my Radiomaster TX16S here. I love this thing. It is a little bit big, honestly, but honestly, this thing is just so reliable and I have really good connections. So there's really not much of a purpose for me to upgrade. The only reason why I might upgrade is just to get something a little bit smaller like the Radiomaster Boxer. But honestly, this thing gets the job done, and a lot of other professional FPV pilots also use this controller. So I really like this thing. All you gotta do is just put on your little crossfire module here.
Welcome to OpenTX.
Power this guy on.
Switch warning.
Next, I got my little LiPos here. These are all charged up and ready to go. And actually I put some gaff tape around this just to give it more grip, because the last thing you want is when your drone crashes for the battery to get disconnected. That actually happened to me before and it really sucks, because then you can't trigger the beeper. The drone is just really hard to find. So it's really important to make sure the battery is as secure as possible. So as you can see here, I got two actually battery straps here. I got some cool rubber stuff that came with the drone here, just to make sure that nothing slips out. And a friend of mine, he actually recommended this thing. It's kind of like a Velcro type thing. I would actually recommend that as well. I have yet to purchase that, but anything that can secure the battery more securely to the drone is definitely worth it, because like I said, last thing you want is for your battery to get disconnected during flight. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this guy on. It's always really important to make sure you secure this thing before you fly, because this thing can actually get caught up in the propellers and it really sucks when that happens. It's gonna get destroyed. All right guys, so before you put on your goggles and try to go for your first maiden flight, I think it's really important to first take a step back and try to fly your drone just line of sight. And that's why it's really important to map an angle mode switch, also known as stabilize mode switch, to your remote controller, because that makes it really easy to fly line of sight. You don't have to worry about the drone tipping over and stuff. It kind of flies more similarly to a Mavic. So I got that switch mapped to right here. And right now I'm just gonna take off and just try to hover it around right here and just make sure that everything's all working properly. So let's go ahead and arm it real quick. Arm, stabilize mode. Awesome. So now we know everything's working properly. This thing can take off. All the controls are correct. So now we can go ahead and put in our goggles, put in our GoPro, and we're ready to fly now. So this is gonna be really awesome. Let's get it. All right guys, so the last thing I wanna talk about before we do our first maiden flight with goggles is it's really important to understand how the battery voltages work and when to land actually, because these drones aren't exactly like Mavics or Minis, and they're not gonna tell you the percentage, and it's not gonna tell you when to land actually. So it's really important to understand that when a battery is fully charged, it should be 4.2 volts per cell. And you can actually set it up on the OSD so it gives you a nice average and it tells you how your batteries are doing when you fly. So keep in mind that you want to land when your drone reaches around 3.8 to 3.5 volts per cell. And this doesn't matter if you're flying 6S, 4S, 3S, 8S, 12S, it doesn't matter. You just want a nice average of the cells, and you can actually set it up on Betaflight so it tells you a nice average of how your cells are doing and your voltage, because it actually is a little bit different, because when you're flying 4S versus 6S, actually on the bottom right corner of your DJI goggles, it tells a different number. Like for example, on my 4S Gep RC Cinelog 35, when I'm flying, when I have full battery, it says 16.8 volts, and then I land when it reaches around 14.2 volts. And when you do the math, that makes sense because you just take the total voltage and you divide it by 4 because it's a 4S battery. However, when I'm flying 6S on here, on the bottom right hand side of my DJI goggles, when I have full battery, it says around like 24.8 volts, and then I should land around 21.9 volts. So you can see how it gets a little bit different when you're flying 6S or 4S battery, but that's why it's really important to understand what's kind of going on there so you know when to land. All right guys, we're all ready to go. And so yeah, first impressions are this thing literally just glides. I mean, I feel like there's just absolutely no resistance when it comes to the wind. And this thing really just moves. I feel like when I fly my Gep RC Cinelog 35, which is a 3.5-inch 4S drone, like that thing I feel like is always kind of fighting the wind, and you really have to use a lot of power to kind of fly in these big, vast, windy environments. But this 7-inch drone right now is literally just cruising. Like I feel like even when I'm not putting that much throttle, this thing really just moves. And I think that really has to do with the weight, because the drone in itself is already pretty heavy, and especially when you put on that fat ass LiPo battery, this thing really does this thing just flies, honestly. And this is exactly what I wanted, because I wanted a rig that could do mountain surfing. I really want to start doing more long range flights, and I really wanted a drone that could just fly longer. So that's another purpose of this first maiden flight. I really want to see exactly what is my realistic flight time with this battery and this drone combination. And that's cool. I don't actually have to use my stopwatch on my iPhone. On my OSD, there's also a little timer, which is awesome. I've been flying for about 2 minutes now. All right guys, so I'm about ready to land pretty soon. Right now we're at 3.55 volts and I've been flying for about 10 minutes now, and honestly, I'm really impressed with the battery life. Like when I first started this flight, I was a little bit worried because I kind of jumped down from like 4.1 volts to 3.8 pretty fast. Like I wasn't really expecting that, but this battery seems to maintain the range from like 3.5 to 3.8, like quite a long time now. Like flying 10 minutes on an FPV is actually quite a long time now. I know for Mavics and stuff, that's not that long, but whew. All right guys, so we just finished our first maiden flight with goggles on the Moz 7, and overall, I'm really satisfied with this drone. I mean, that was freaking awesome. At first, I was a little bit concerned because I jumped from about 4.1 volts to 3.8 within just a few minutes. So I was kind of expecting to only get like around 5 minutes of flight time. And it's a little bit disappointing because the whole reason why I got these big batteries is because I wanted to fly for longer. So at first I was a little bit skeptical, but I realized as the flight continued that this thing can actually maintain its voltage from about like 3.8 volts to 3.5 for about like 6, 7, 8 minutes even. So that was awesome. I just flew for about 10 minutes with this battery. And for me, that's a huge jump. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, especially if you come from flying Mavic 3s and stuff, but flying FPV 10 minutes, even 5 minutes is actually kind of a long time. Because on my Cinelog 35, when I was trying to do similar flying with my GoPro Hero 11, I was only getting about like 3 to 4 minutes actually. So going from 3 to 4 minutes to 10 minutes with a GoPro Hero 11 full size is actually pretty huge, because now I can do some mountain surfing. I can get some really cool shots, I'm confident, with 10 minutes. So I think that's huge and I'm super excited about that. And I think another really nice touch about the way Gep RC set up this drone is they set up the battery functions really nicely actually. I know I just did a whole spiel before about knowing your battery voltage and when to land, etc. And although that is really important to know when and how your battery is behaving and when to land, etc., because not all drones are going to be set up this way, I do really like how this is set up, because the whole time I was flying in my upper left-hand corner, I could see the average cell voltage, so I was able to monitor it. There's also a little icon there, so I could see my battery level there. It's just kind of like an iPhone. And actually it also gave me a warning when to land. Right when I hit 3.5 volts, it told me that I should start to land actually. So that's actually perfect. All right, so overall, I'm very satisfied with this new drone here. It's exactly what I wanted, and it's exactly what I was missing in my drone fleet. After doing that second flight, it's super apparent that this thing is just not affected by the wind at all. I mean, right now I'm over here by the water. It's super windy here actually, and this thing, I can't even feel the wind. Doesn't matter if I'm going with the wind or against the wind. I'm always at a nice constant speed, and I feel very comfortable. When I was flying my Cinelog 35, you can definitely feel a difference when you're going against the wind versus with the wind. I mean, it's like a night and day difference, but this thing is just not affected at all. And that's really huge because I'm able to have a nice predictable way of flying. I'm able to do my lines well. I went under the bridge over there, no problems at all. I just was noticing a little bit of a drop in signal when I was flying over there, and just tiny drops in signals, which is to be expected. I mean, you can't always have perfect connection. It also might be considering that I'm over here kind of in a valley a little bit. Maybe next time I'll try to be over there more kind of and try to stand up more to get more connection with my goggles. But overall, this thing is awesome. I mean, it performed flawlessly and had a nice flight time again. I just flew for about 9 minutes. Probably could have went for another 2 or 3 minutes, honestly. I was doing a nice little cruising speed, but other than that, I'm really happy with how this thing performs, and I'm really excited to get some more flights out in the mountains and some more nature areas, because this thing is an absolute beast for flying outside. But overall, hope you guys learned something from this video. Hope you guys know that it's not too hard to set up a drone like this, and I encourage you guys to go out and buy some more Bind and Flies, experiment with some different rigs, experiment with 7 inches, 5 inches, Cinewhoops. I mean, each drone has a different purpose, so that's why it's so cool to experiment with different rigs, because each drone can get you different types of shots, and it's a different kind of experience. So hope you guys learned something from this video, and I'll see you guys on the next one.